Most of us give up on our goals early because we're working towards these long-term achievements that in reality can be kind of boring sometimes. The work can be hard. We can feel like it's taking ages to see results. And often there's something a little bit more shiny, fun in the way that can distract us. But what if productivity didn't have to be painful and success didn't have to be a constant struggle? What if it could be different? Hey, what's up? I'm Adam. If you're new here and if you're returning, then you know what's good. Most of us want to be successful in 2024, right? We want to see our goals and our visions realized, but we don't want to be miserable along the journey. And in fact, that misery along the journey can stop us early, stop us in our tracks and from getting to where we want to be. And in this video, I want to dive deeper into the book Feel Good Productivity by Ali Abdaal that just recently came out. In this book, he unpacks why feel good productivity is something that we should all be aiming for, not just because it's better if you feel better along your journey, but also that the journey is more successful when you use the feedback loop associated with good emotions and positive feeling. And if you're not quite sold, well, Ali Abdaal, the author, is a medical doctor who graduated top of his class from Cambridge. He has millions of subscribers on YouTube and also a multi-million-pound business. So we can assume that he at least knows partly what he's doing. But what we're really going to get into is how he went from a stressed, anxious version of productivity to the feel-good productivity that is associated with happiness, with excitement, with joy around the work that you're doing. So let's just get into it. The book is actually split into three parts, and the first is energizers, things that increase our energy and our mood and thus our productivity. The second part is about blockers. They're things that stop us and actually heighten those feelings of stress and anxiety and all of the hormones and emotional responses that come with that. And then finally, it's sustainers, the things that we can do to ensure that we sustain our productivity across the long term. But if you're anything like me, then you're probably going to be really interested in the blockers section of this book, which is what we're going to go into. But let's take a step back first, because why does feeling good actually increase productivity and therefore our chances of achieving our goals? Ali cites work from one psychologist called Friedrichsen, who argues that feeling good broadens and builds. The broaden element, well, when we feel good, we're open to more ideas. Our mind is open and therefore we can see more possibilities, more solutions, right? And therefore, if we're trying to work towards something, dealing with something challenging, then we're more likely to succeed. The second thing is the build, which is the long-term impact of these positive emotions. We build up almost a reservoir of them that we can use later down the line when things start to get tough. And what's happening under the hood? Well, positive emotions are associated with positive hormones. There's an actual biological response happening, and we're getting those things like endorphins, oxytocin, these feel-good hormones. And at the same time, we're reducing the other hormones that we associate with things like stress, things like cortisol, things that heighten our fight or flight response. Ultimately, a lot of these studies have found that it's not that success leads to happiness, it's actually that happiness and feeling good can lead to success. So let's start with seeking clarity. Procrastination is something that affects us all. It gets between all of us and our dreams at some point. But Ali makes the case that it's not enough just to be more motivated or be more disciplined to move past procrastination. And in fact, telling the chronic procrastinator to just do it would be like telling a clinically depressed person to cheer up. Instead, we have to go to the root of the problem and unblock ourselves, understand why we're procrastinating in the first place. This is why seeking clarity is a big focus in feel-good productivity. Because when we lack clarity, in other words, things are ambiguous and we're not sure, this starts to heighten our sense of fear and uncertainty, and those negative emotions start to be drawn on, which means those negative hormones start to be introduced, and it's a reinforcing cycle. So how do we actually overcome this? What action steps can we take? Well, I'm going to draw on two of the most interesting experiments that I found in this chapter of the book. And the first is called the 5 Whys. Now, the 5 Whys can actually be traced back to Japan, and the founder of the car Toyota, he was known for his obsessive focus and understanding what was going wrong in his factories. If something went wrong, he wanted to understand why, but not just at the surface level, at the root. And this is where he employs the 5 Whys. This is all because if you keep asking why, keep peeling back the layers, you get to the actual root source, the root cause of the problem that you're dealing with here. Here's an example that a lot of us can relate to. I can't get up for gym in the morning. Why? Because I'm tired. Why? Because I didn't get enough sleep. Why? Because I was on my phone till 2 a.m. Why? Because I struggled to disconnect from my phone. Why? Because I haven't put any boundaries, tools, or systems in place to effectively use my phone in a healthy way. So now the issue wasn't, oh, I just can't get up for the gym in the morning. Now we can actually go to the root of the problem and tackle that. We can seek clarity and move forward. The really cool thing is you can use this not only to work out why things aren't going right and why you're not achieving your goals, but also if the thing you're doing is worth it in the first place. If you are struggling and being blocked with an activity or a task that you're working towards, ask yourself why 5 times. And if you can't get back to your root, your really goal that underlies and underpins everything, maybe that task isn't as important as you think. Now, the second interesting experiment in this chapter was actually nice goals. So most of us have heard of SMART goals, but Ali makes the case that whilst these can be very useful, and he himself used them, I've used them multiple times, they're not always appropriate at all times. So what are nice goals? N stands for near term. So instead of having long-term goals that may be a year long, we focus them in a little bit, and so that our mind doesn't wander too much or we don't become overwhelmed. Perhaps the goal is actually for the next 4 weeks or the next 12 weeks versus 5-year goals. The I in nice goals is input based. Here we're focusing on the process more so than the outcomes. For example, where an output goal may focus on something like losing 5 kilograms by the end of the year, an input goal would be based on what we can do to get there, like walking 10 minutes every day, or going to the gym 3 times a week, or changing our diet. The C in nice goals is controllable, and it links very well with input-based goals, right? There's no point setting a goal and the things that it's dependent on are completely out of your control, right? Because you're setting yourself up for failure and then those negative emotions that come with it. So instead, focus on things that are within your control, that you know that you can take the actions towards achieving. And the E in nice goals is about energizing, the things that he talks about in the first chapter, such as play, power, and people. Okay, so we've sought some clarity, we've asked ourselves why 5 times, and we've also started to understand how we can build different types of goals. But the next part is all about finding courage. The amygdala is a part of our brain that is responsible for threat detection, right? Pretty useful. You want to be able to detect threats in your environment. And that was very useful when we was in the wild, for example, and there may be a lion over there, and my body needs to respond very quickly for survival. But what's been going on lately as our environment has changed is something called the amygdala hijack, where our body responds disproportionately to things it assumes is a threat, like a public speech, or talking to people that you've never spoken to before, or starting a task that seems so big that the likelihood of failure seems so big, and it's like threat, 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 threat to my identity, threat to my place in the social setting, threat. Now, what does the brain do when it detects a threat? It tries to remove you from it. It's its natural survival instinct. And in the case of, say, a public speech, removing you from it would be just not doing it. So back to how do we overcome this? Well, there are 2 experiments in this chapter as well that I actually want to go deeper into. The first is called the identity label. This experiment is all about the way we see ourselves and how we talk to ourselves. And if you've read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, then you'll start to see some overlap with this. In reality, if we tell ourselves like, we are not a good public speaker, but we need to speak in front of a public, the idea and the threat is heightened, right? There's this thing over here that we have to do. I'm telling myself and convincing myself that I'm not the person who can do that. My brain's like, well, now there's a threat detected. We're going to go out in front of our social group and we're going to do this thing that we're not good at. Problem, shut down. This is why the way that we talk to ourselves and the labels we give ourselves can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, try changing the way that you talk to yourself. Catch yourself when you are labeling yourself in negative ways, and think about how you can rephrase it. Think about evidence that you can draw on that suggests, actually, I'm not as bad as this thing, as I said. Actually, there was that one time I did this and that went pretty well. And actually, I speak to my colleagues every day in front of each other in Zoom, and that goes pretty smoothly most of the time. And suddenly you start to see that the labels that you're giving yourself most of the time aren't very fair. The other kind of experiment in this chapter that I liked was about the 10-10-10 rule. And this is about grounding yourself. And in terms of finding courage, realizing, will this really matter in the future? And this is how you do it. If you are faced with something that is heightening your fear, right, and your sense of panic, ask yourself, will this matter in 10 minutes? Will this matter in 10 weeks? Will this matter in 10 years? Here's an example. You want to post your first video on TikTok or YouTube, or your first LinkedIn post. If you post it and it doesn't go perfectly, will it matter in 10 minutes? Well, maybe. I feel quite uncomfortable, and if somebody says something, maybe I'll be like, yikes. Will it matter in 10 weeks? Probably not. By that point, it's probably cycled, out of the algorithm, and people probably won't even be watching it. And most people don't really care that much anyway. And the third is, will it matter in 10 years? Almost absolutely not. In fact, most social media platforms may not even be around in 10 years, so it's probably not that deep. And suddenly that next step doesn't seem so scary. It doesn't seem like it's doing the absolute most. And so with that being said, the final chapter in this section on blockers is called Get Started. And here we have a lesson from physics and the great Isaac Newton. An object at rest stays at rest. while an object in motion stays in motion, unless acted on by an external imbalanced force. In other words, if something is still, it will remain still, and if something is moving, it will keep moving, unless something interrupts it, another force comes and interacts with it. Now, as simple as that seems, it was a very profound moment in physics when this was adopted and understood, but it also applies to productivity. Think about it. Why is it so hard to get started, right? Like, you find that once you're in the flow of things, once you're moving, once you're doing that activity, momentum will carry you a lot of the way, right? It doesn't seem so hard, but getting started, getting out of bed to go to the gym, getting to your desk to edit that video or start on that new product, getting ready for that speech, all these things, the first steps seem so difficult. And so the experiments I'm going to draw on now are all about making it easier to get started. The first is a very simple but effective experiment, and it's all about reducing environmental friction. Why make things harder for yourself when you don't have to? And this is where that we can set up our environment in ways that aligns with the goals that we are trying to achieve, aligns with the tasks that we are trying to execute. For example, if you want to read every night before bed, it doesn't make sense to put the book across the room but have your mobile phone next to you. Because what is the easiest option? What is the logical option? Well, I'm just going to pick up my phone. It doesn't require me getting out of bed and potentially into the cold if you're like where I am right now in London and it's cold, right? And the book is all the way across the room. Those odds aren't in my favor. However, if I set up that the book is by my nightstand every day, right? So that when I jump into bed, I lean over, I look over, the book's here, and I've left my phone in another room or even on the desk. Or now the easy and the logical option is to pick up the book and read. And suddenly, working towards my goals become easier because my environment is aligned with me. Remember, we're trying to feel good. We're trying to make things easier for ourselves. And therefore, we don't want to put in obstacles that increase friction. The other experiment is one that I don't think we consider often enough. And it's called Forgive Yourselves. There's an experiment done where this professor was looking at students who forgave themselves when they didn't study for the test hard enough, when they weren't motivated, versus students who beat themselves up every single time. And funnily enough, the students who forgave themselves and just moved on did better than the other students. So it turns out that just moping around when things don't go right or when you didn't execute when you said isn't very useful, it's not productive, and it doesn't make anybody feel good. Self-forgiveness allows students to let go of post-procrastination guilt and shame. They could move past their behavior and focus on the upcoming examination without the burden of past acts. In other words, if we can forgive ourselves when things don't go right, we can focus on getting back on track, moving forward, and feeling good about the whole process. Now, honestly, I've just scratched the surface with this book. It is very dense. It has so many ideas, so many studies, and so many experiments for you to try so that you can take action on the things that are stopping you from feel-good productivity. I would love to dive deeper into some of the other sections of this book, but for now, I hope some of this resonated with you and that you found experiments and things that you can take with you into your 2024. If you enjoyed this video, I'm almost certain that you'll enjoy the video that I did on the war of art and how procrastination shows up in different forms and other ways that we can tackle it. But I will see you in the next video.